Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I wanted to do a tag. It's Tuesday and I want to get on Tag Tuesday. And a few weeks ago, Shawn the Book Maniac tagged me to do a tag called, I think it's called a Try a Chapter tag. The idea is you're supposed to take books off your shelf, 4 or 5 books off your shelf that you haven't read, that have kind of been there for a while, and read a chapter and then decide if you think that book's worth keeping for you or if that's a book that maybe you need to get rid of. I chose 5 books to look at and to read a chapter from, and I want to go through those probably pretty quickly. So the first book I chose is the Studs Lonegan series. This is a book, the series of books, I think there are 3 books here, yeah, a trilogy, about a character named Studs Lonegan. The 3 books are Young Lonegan, The Young Manhood of Studs Lonegan, and Judgment Day. So these books are by James T. Farrell, and there was a time in American literary history where these books and Farrell were kind of icons of kind of the working class hero literature. A book like this with 3 volumes in it that's like an oversized paperback that's also really thick, those are books I have a hard time making myself pick up and read, and on top of that the font size is pretty small. These may all sound like superficial reasons why this book may end up being unhauled one day. I read a chapter, and while, you know, it was pretty good, the writing and the story feel a little dated. I believe these books were published sometime in the 1930s. Yeah, 32, 34, and 35. And so they're kind of a part of that tradition of American letters during the Great Depression, which was definitely questioning the fairness of the capitalist system. And while I'm okay with that message, and sometimes, you know, I agree with that message, I'm not sure I want to read 3 novels comprising almost 900 pages in a style that's fairly well dated to the 1930s. But, you know, I might keep that, I might unhaul it. Anyway, that's the first book I chose to look at. The second book I chose, that's been on my shelf for a while, is The Road to Wellville by T. Corey Hesson Boyle, or I believe he goes by T.C. Boyle now. At least that's what the fellows over at Strip Cover Lit call him. I have read several short stories by Boyle, and sometimes I like his work and sometimes I don't. He is a good writer, and he's capable, I think, of writing good things. But I started this book, which is about essentially Dr. Kellogg's sanatorium, health sanatorium they sets up in, I believe, Battle Creek, Michigan. Dr. Kellogg, famous for the cereal, in which he attempts to reform people's lives by reforming their diet. And so the book is kind of written from inside his head, and it's a very arch description of the way in which Kellogg goes about kind of convincing people and putting on a show about dietary health. And I'm not sure I can do arch semi-historical fiction for, you know, 500 or so pages, but it is the only T.C. Boyle book I own, and I didn't dislike the first chapter. There was some clever writing in here, there were some interesting creations, there's enough of an element of historical fiction, which is something I like, and right at the end of the first chapter there's even a little bit of mystery added in that kind of makes the story feel kind of compelling. I don't think this is something I'm going to pick up right away, but I do think I'm going to keep this, in part so I have a book by T.C. Boyle that I can read and say, I've actually read the man's work, and in part because the chapter I read, I kind of liked it. I thought it was okay. So I'll probably keep that. So the third book I chose was a book that you saw in that video about books on your shelf that you've never read that have been there for a while, and that book for me, or one of those books for me, is July the 7th by Jill McCorkle, who I never read this book. I never even opened this book, even though I probably had it for more than 20 years. So I thought, you know what, I'll just read a chapter of this, and I did, and to be honest with you, I was surprised. It is not what I thought it would be. She creates a really interesting character right at the beginning of the book, and you automatically want to know, you know, what he's up to and why the way he is and what's happened to him. And so there was some real interest in that, and I really kind of liked the first few pages. But then By the end of 15 pages, I believe she had introduced what feels like at least 3 other major characters. That's a lot of characters to throw at me in that short a period of time, and it's almost like just as though I got interested in one, she changed over to somebody else, and sometimes the character she described next didn't seem nearly as interesting. So I liked it. I'm going to keep it because I think it seems like a fairly easy read. Here's something silly. I like the shape of the book. If you see my series on book love, I have a whole video about how some books I just like because of the way they look or the way they feel or their shape. So I like this book's kind of nice square shape. What's this? The 4th book I read is this novel called Go by John Clinton Holmes. So when I was doing my graduate work in history, I did an independent study about the Beatniks and their influence on American society and who the Beatniks were and what the Beatniks were about. And I really kind of got into Beatniks for a while. And so I bought several works of Jack Kerouac. I attempted to read Howl. I read some Beatnik stuff, and John Clinton Holmes was one of the Beat Generation writers. I'm not sure that I would call himself a Beatnik, but in a sense, he feels like the kind of person who is there when the Beatniks are around, and he's kind of mentally recording notes so he could write a novel, and this is that novel. And I read the whole first chapter, which, you can recognize the characters in here as major figures from the Beat Generation. You can recognize Allen Ginsberg, recognize Jack Kerouac in this. And, if I'd read this when I was really interested in the Beats, I might have found that interesting. But I really just found it boring. This for me is probably a no. If I'm going to unhaul one of these books, it's probably this. So the last book that I read is another book that I've actually had on my shelf for a long period of time, and that's How Late It Was, How Late by James Kelman. So I think it's possible, and I'm not sure, that James Kelman might have won the Man Booker for this novel. And I think if he did, I know at least he was nominated. Don't ask me the year. But I know at least he was nominated. I know that it was somewhat controversial. And what made it controversial today, in today's world, makes it seem kind of quaint. It was controversial because it has the F word in it a lot. I mean, there are a lot of F words in this book. I read like the first, I think, 20 pages of this book, and it is told from inside the head, essentially, of a character, so far at least, of a character named who calls himself Sammy, and it's told in, I'm going to say, it's written with an Irish dialect, an Irish accent, and so you kind of have to get used to that. But I can hear the words in my head in a Scottish accent, and I'm not sure the book's supposed to be funny, but I really thought these first few pages were funny, and it appealed to me on a personal level. So the book starts off with Sammy essentially waking up from having been passed out in a patch of grass along a city street with a group of soldiers looking at him. So he's passed out in this patch of grass. He's lost his actual shoes, and yet he has on what we in the United States would call tennis shoes. His clothes aren't the same, and he clearly has either drunk too much or taken some kind of drugs that have caused him to kind of lose track of time and to kind of pass out. He ends up then getting in a fight with the soldiers, and he gets beaten up, and then I stopped reading while he is in jail, dealing with the jailers. But I think that of all the books I tried for this try chapter tag, this one was my favorite. In part probably, and this is just, again, kind of just purely personal and not literary at all. So, story time from the old man. When I was in college, I lived in a house that was about 2 blocks away from the college campus where I went to school, and it was also 2 blocks away from one of the 3 bars in the college town where I went to school. And so that bar became kind of an attractive nuisance to me and my friends because we could just walk to the bar and walk home. And on our path to the bar, there was a front yard with just some luscious, gorgeous green grass in it. and I believe on more than one occasions, one of us decided to take a little rest after being at the bar for probably too long by laying in the grass at that house on the corner. I don't know what the people who lived there thought. Hopefully they didn't see us, but occasionally it was just too attractive and we were too tired, and so one of us would just like say, "That's it, I can't go any further," and just lay down in the really nice green grass, and that kind of reminded me of the beginning of the story. Anyway, thanks to Shawn for tagging me to do this video. I'll leave a link to his video down below. Anyway, let me know what you think. Let me know if you read any of these books, heard of any of these authors, can, correct my assumptions about any of them. Look forward to hearing that, and as always, thank you for watching.